Hi everyone. Mark is
Hello, everyone.
here. Mark is here. Yuri is here. Christopher is here. So all the presenters are here. Good to see so many people joining. We have today close to 100 people registered. That's good to see that the number of people joining our webinars are is increasing. So hi Piotr. Hi Pavlo. Hi everyone. So 1 minute and we going to start. People will be joining automatically. All right. So, Mark, I think we can start, right? We cannot hear you. We cannot hear you. We cannot hear you.
Yeah, we can start. People will be coming in slowly, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. So, hi everyone. This is our Q3 webinar, and we welcome everyone. So, today we we're going to do the following. We're going to start with my business partner, Mark McNamee, the co-founder of UBN. He will present the latest geopolitical developments and he will cover several issues. And among them, will the US, European Union intensify pressure on Russia? Should we expect Russia to escalate the war? And how this winter will look like. So after Mark's presentation, Mark he's gonna present for about 20, 25 minutes. After Mark, we have Christopher from Brightbird Risk, and he will update on Ukraine security status. And after Christopher, we going to have our keynote speaker, Yuri Sak. Yuri is a former advisor to the Minister of Defense, and he also is co-founder of Stratcom War Room, and he's a partner at CFC Big Ideas. Yuri Sak has been a good friend of UBN for many years, and we are delighted and happy to have him. His knowledge and expertise is truly outstanding. And again, this Q3 webinar is uh, is done in partnership with Danish Industry. And we happy to see so many actually people joining. Good to see you all. Thank you for joining. I know you're busy people, but it's truly beneficial for all of us to hear the latest updates on Ukraine. Okay, so I'll give the floor to Mark McNamee, my business partner. Mark, you can you can
Very good.
you can yeah, the
I'll
floor
take
is
it from
yours.
here. All right. Thank you, Andrew, for the introduction. Thanks, everyone, for joining as well. And look forward to hearing also after my presentation from Christopher from Brightbird, who will give an important update on the security situation, particularly now with obviously the really the pending fall of Pokrovsk and what that means going forward. And then, of course, hearing from Yuri Sak, good friend and strong supporter of UBN for years. So uh, that said, it's going to be a tough winter. There's no point in ignoring it or hiding it, and that's just sort of the endemic issues within Ukraine, but the entire political, financial, security atmosphere is going to be a period of escalation here, which already began a couple of weeks ago, and it's going to accelerate here in the coming months. And so we are, in some ways, maybe hitting an inflection point in the war, entering the fourth year of this war. But in our opinion, things are actually starting to change. And in our opinion, better for Ukraine, but it is going to be a difficult period in the months ahead. So, as mentioned, I'll do typically the geopolitical war outlook. We'll also look briefly at the economy, business trends, what companies are what they're feeling, what they're seeing, what they're doing. Then the security update by Brightbird, and then Yuri Sak. As always, please do type your questions into the chat. We'll try to get to them as we go along throughout. So starting off, what is the latest? Don't forget also, amidst everything going on, the U.S.-China trade war is actually relatively important for Ukraine. Um, it's first of all, it's a truce. The trade war is far from over. There's far too much just deep distrust and hostility between the two sides. Already this year, China hasn't didn't really follow through on the earlier agreements in April. That was annoying, of course, the U.S. administration. And the agreement that they more or less came to is temporary in nature, only 1 year, and fundamentally. China holds more of the cards at the end of the day. The US is in greater need of rare earths, more so than China is in need of the semiconductors. So I won't go into too much depth. The whole point here is that expect another period of hostility in the relatively near future between the two sides. And the meaning for Ukraine here is actually relatively positive insofar as that is going to anger Trump, of course. Putin has already angered Trump clearly. And in the American voter mindset and in the administration in Washington, D.C. As well, this more sort of closely aligns than this axis of evil, as Speaker Mike Johnson put it, between China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. And so that's good because then it makes us more clearly support the good guys in the war, Ukraine, against the bad guys in the war, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. So actually, the implications for Ukraine are relatively positive there. Not to mention, we should see lower oil prices as a result of likely continued tariffs, maybe even worsened tariffs around the world between U.S. and China, causing obviously worsening economic repercussions globally, and therefore lower commodity prices, which hurts Russia. We, of course, got the scare with Trump. He was going to have the meeting with Zelensky, maybe give tomahawks, and the night before then has a nice little conversation with Vladimir Putin and changes his mind, talks about a Budapest summit, and then 3 days later, Rubio intervened, thankfully, and had a call with Lavrov, and then told Trump he probably should not go to this meeting. So, in the end, the Trump roller coaster continued, but canceled the Budapest summit. And critically, this was really a step change here in the war in terms of Trump finally enacting some costs on Russia, not just putting pressure on Ukraine, not just giving support to Ukraine in some ways, but actually putting costs on Russia to try to really establish a policy of peace through strength, finally. So we'll get more into that. Another critical point, which maybe got missed here, were Putin's nuclear threats. Now, this isn't indicating that Putin is going to be dropping a nuclear weapon anytime soon, but the point here for us is that these nuclear threats signify that Putin himself has more or less given up on his relationship with Trump, his personal rapport with Trump, believing that he can basically charm and coerce and seduce Trump into basically achieving what he can't achieve on the battlefield, basically sacrifice Ukraine. We saw nuclear threats across 2023 almost on a monthly basis from Medvedev and other members of the administration, 2024 as well. And we actually saw a lot of silence related to nuclear threats this year, while Putin was trying to, of course, improve the relationship with Trump. So it's actually quite important to see, again, after about a year pause, Putin basically admitting he can't sort of seduce and charm Trump into doing his bidding. So he's back to hostility and nuclear saber rattling. And then at the same time, obviously Trump just the week prior initiating the sanctions. So it's a good move to see in terms of souring of the relationship. EU is showing greater resolve. 19th sanctions package, that's positive. The problem here is that they continue to not take Russia's foreign exchange reserves, and that's absolutely critical for Ukraine's financial stability and really ability to continue the war for the medium and long term. So that's the first thing, frankly, of all things to watch for. That's the first thing to watch for next month when they make the next decision on it. We believe that they will take the FX reserves. It's basic mathematics. They have to. But unfortunately, Belgium specifically, the political processes are in the way. The land and air wars, as everybody I'm sure is following quite closely on a daily basis, are intensifying. And that's not just in Ukraine, but also in Russia. And not just in Russia, but also in NATO territory, as we've seen. And that expansion of the conflict somewhat, both into Russia and in NATO countries, is obviously positive for Ukraine. Obviously, the pain on Russia, but then also reminding Western populations, Western leaders of the threat that Russia poses and the need to support Ukraine. So all of that said, I would say quite conclusively, the last couple of weeks we've hit really about the last month or so, we've hit a fundamental new phase in the war. Putin, as I would say, is more desperate to escalate to de-escalate. Time, frankly, is not really on his side now that we're seeing a more robust response out of the US, a more robust response out of Europe, and obviously a more robust Ukraine itself. The summer offensive has been extremely costly. Pokrovsk was supposed to be taken, by the way, this past summer. Obviously, that failed. It will be taken maybe in the coming weeks, maybe the next couple of months, but that's way, way behind schedule and at an extraordinary cost. The economy continues to decline. Ukraine is hitting the energy infrastructure, low oil, global oil prices. This is all really dramatically affecting Russia. And then also politically, as mentioned, Putin failed to get Trump to do his bidding in Alaska. Trump actually didn't sell out Ukraine to Putin in Alaska, and did not since either. And the canceled Budapest summit, the enactment of sanctions, are all clear signals to Putin that Trump actually isn't working for him and isn't doing his bidding. So good to see for standing here, sitting here in Ukraine. And for Putin, if he wants to keep up the intensity of this extreme intensity, losing 30,000, 40,000 guys a month at times over the last year and a half, and continue that across 2026, he's going to need another mobilization, and the financial costs involved also will incur very deep austerity and a deprioritization of basically the civilian economy entirely to do this. That, of course, is politically extremely dangerous for him to do. So he needs to move things faster. And also, it just creates in the atmosphere just this such tense period between the warring powers, the West and Russia. A misreading, a miscommunication, some problem could lead, of course, to an escalation and very specifically a direct NATO-Russia conflict. So the point for us in Ukraine, far more pressure is coming. This winter is going to be extremely difficult. There's really no point in lying about it. We're already experiencing some levels of blackouts here across the country, and of course the extreme cold weather hasn't even hit yet. So this will be difficult, and then not to mention the loss of Pokrovsk and what that means going forward. So we need a lot more support from the West. The good news is things are moving in the right direction. The unfortunate part is that we need the FX reserves immediately, and Europe is not taking them, unfortunately. So you can put as many sanctions as you want on Russia. You can keep pushing on Russia. As a separate policy, Ukraine needs the weapons and the financial support, and we need to see that pick up. We expect that it will pick up, but as always in this war, that Western support continues to be delayed. The Trump roller coaster, just to give a brief update on the latest machinations of the last month or so. Yes, ups and downs, of course, but things are moving in Ukraine's direction overall, as they have been consistently really since about April of this year. So we have 6 solid months or so of Trump consistently more or less siding with Ukraine and away from Russia. I won't go to all the quotes here, but here are some of the more prominent and important sayings by Trump in recent times, talking about the Budapest meeting, why waste the time? Tremendous sanctions because Putin, Russia's the problem, not Ukraine, not anyone else. Putin is the problem in terms of continuing this war. Very critically, Trump recognizing publicly himself that his personal rapport, his charm, his charisma was inadequate, and it meant nothing, and he couldn't get Putin to stop the fighting, which means he's more or less giving up on that relationship, which is very good. Approving of NATO actually shooting down jets, and then another critical one, Secretary of Treasury Bessent, when basically after Trump had canceled the Putin-Trump summit in Budapest, he sent Dmitriev, his more or less his commercial guy, his economics deal guy, to the U.S. to try to again seduce Trump with some grand economic joint ventures. And the White House wouldn't see him. Trump wouldn't see him. No one in his administration would see him in D.C. And he only met with really a low-level congresswoman from Florida and totally ignored. And Bessent actually criticized him for coming to the United States, calling him a Kremlin propagandist. So again, very good to see this detachment of the Kremlin from Trump and his administration, fortunately. So basically, what's going on here? How did this all happen? You have to think back to the beginning of the year, February, Oval Office fight. Trump seems solidly on Russia's side almost, humiliating U.S. ally in Ukraine and Zelensky in the Oval Office. And then we're at this point, which is, of course, very positive to see. But it's hard maybe outside of the United States and for non-Americans to understand. The real enemy for the Republicans or for the Democrats is the other side in the United States. The enemy is internal in the United States. So when Trump and his team came into power, what they did know is that Biden's policy was to unquestioningly support Ukraine and strongly support the transatlantic relationship with the European NATO partners. Um, the simple fact that the Democrats supported that policy meant to the Republicans that this must be the wrong policy then, because the enemy are the Democrats and Biden, so they must be doing something wrong. And frankly, it took them about a year to realize actually the Democrats were conducting the correct policy, despite the fact that they are Democrats. They were actually conducting the correct policy. So now we're seeing this Republican administration moving in the right direction. As mentioned, Trump believed that his personal rapport, his charm, his charisma could seduce and win over Putin, and now he seems to publicly recognize that is not the case. But we will always continue to have this problem that Trump does deep down want to be liked by Putin. He wants to be liked by Xi Jinping as well. He wants to be accepted and approved of by these great leaders of this current generation. So that's unfortunate, and that's why we, of course, need to be weary of any future phone calls from Vladimir Putin or any times that Putin wants to show Trump a little bit more attention. But in either case, the positive news is that I think the first two here are out the window. We can kind of disregard those. The problem is he still does want to be liked by Trump. Anyhow, for our purposes, what does this all mean for Ukraine? Huge step in the right direction. This is very, very positive, and we see this in polling. It's really incredible to consider the support, not just in the United States, but specifically amongst Republicans and specifically amongst the MAGA crowd in the United States that has developed over the last 6 to 9 months. You had deep distrust and antipathy amongst Republicans and especially MAGA towards Ukraine and Zelensky at the beginning of the year. And I believe the silver lining in Trump believing Putin for so long and dragging this out for the past year is that it is shown to everyone around the world that Putin is the problem. Putin is the obstacle towards peace. And now the Republicans see that. So you see in both these supporting sanctions, supporting providing weaponry to Ukraine. Very strong support, even stronger support amongst Republicans compared to Democrats, which is absolutely critical. So very, very positive, moving in a very good direction. And I fully expect, Trump even said he's putting on these sanctions. And that's just one area of support, the sanctions. That's the major area of support. But he threatened further sanctions if Russia still doesn't come to the table. He has already put pressure on India, and India has reduced to an extent its purchases of Russian oil. And also months ago, Trump behind the scenes secretly was providing the long-range intel for Ukraine to be able to hit Russia's energy infrastructure, giving guidance and targeting intelligence information so that Ukraine could be more successful, as it has been over the last 2.5 months in hitting Russia's energy. So very positive. And the point is we're moving back to this peace through strength policy of the United States finally, which is what Trump actually campaigned on and said after his election that would be his policy. We didn't see any of the strength, though, for about a year until a couple of weeks ago. So that's very positive. And then lastly, another very positive in terms of this more somewhat of a turnaround in Trump policy is the fact that we finally have an outcome-driven policy. Under Biden, unfortunately, we had no outcome. Biden was ready to fight 10 years down to the last Ukrainian, but Biden had a process. Biden had relationships with the European partners, Ukraine, providing weaponry. Too little, too late, of course, but he had the political machine moving in the right direction, at least. Trump, unfortunately, doesn't appreciate process, doesn't appreciate the political bureaucracy required to conduct foreign policy, but he's been outcome driven since the start. We need to hit a ceasefire. The positive news is now finally we have the outcome from the U.S. administration pursuing and achieving a ceasefire matched with an actual process to get there. We have the Pearl program in terms of European NATO allies buying U.S. defense equipment. We have now a more robust sanctions policy that's being unified between European partners, UK and the United States. And now, God willing, the EU takes Russia's foreign exchange reserves and provides that consistent financial backing to Ukraine. So then we have the right processes to actually move in the right direction towards the outcome we need, which is why we are fundamentally still optimistic we're going to have a ceasefire in 2026. For reference, about a month ago, we had our Q3 event at the end of September, a little over a month ago, and asked this question. A lot of pessimism, unfortunately, in the room about Trump not imposing harsh sanctions. At the time, Andrew and I did try to remind the crowd that actually we should be more optimistic and Trump will likely impose harsher sanctions. And fortunately, that has come to fruition. Trump is actually putting in some more sanctions, and we expect, sorry, Trump has already put in some sanctions, and we expect more to come. So that's positive. Now, a little bit of negative news, unfortunately, given Russia's strikes on energy infrastructure, given Russia's, I don't even want to say success, but advances on the battlefield and likelihood of taking Pokrovsk in the relatively near future. We have, unfortunately, raised scenario one, Russian victory, from 10% to 25%. This is primarily based upon the factors I mentioned, but most critically, Europe not taking Russia's FX reserves to date. We expect them to do this, when we hope that they do this next month, or if they don't, in early 2026, we would then considerably lower the likelihood of scenario one. But that's the thing to watch out for, because you can put as much pressure on Russia as you want, but if you don't provide the necessary financing and defense equipment to Ukraine, it won't matter. Scenario two, as a result, unfortunately, we had to lower. We still believe this is the most likely outcome over time, but unfortunately, we did have to lower the likelihood of that. So what to watch for, and then I'll hand it over to the next speakers here. On the battlefield and on the land, yes, no breakthrough. We already saw Dobrapilya. That's the picture here on the right. We're now seeing Pokrovsk. After Pokrovsk, most likely, due to logistics reasons, Russia would advance northward towards that defensive fortress belt, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, etc., in that region. And in time, be able to take that. But as always with Russia, whether it's Avdiivka, whether it's Bakhmut, takes an extremely long time at an extraordinary cost. And that could last the entirety, for example, of 2026. In the air, as already mentioned, right, the deep strikes, are we hitting maybe an inflection point with the measures and countermeasures and countermeasures and countermeasures between the two sides here? If Russia, unfortunately, could obtain a strategic technological advantage, that is something to watch out for and be worried about for this winter, if they're able to then be even more successful in their strikes of energy infrastructure. In terms of Western resolve, as I've mentioned throughout the presentation here, more EU and US sanctions. Will we also, critical to that, Trump with the EU pushing more strongly on India and China. The EU enacted its 19th sanctions package, very positive, going after Russian LNG, but also going after Chinese and Indian financing, traditional banks, but also crypto exchanges as well. So that's positive. Are they going to actually have the resolve to implement these much more strongly to reduce those purchases of Russian oil? Will they take Russia's FX reserves? Will they respond if there's another major incursion of Russian jets into NATO territory? Will they have a robust response? And then, of course, more purchases of US equipment. Our answer to all of that is yes, actually. And maybe it's hard to believe, but nonetheless, these things really do have to happen, and European leader and United States leaders do seem to recognize it. And if looking sort of reading between the lines of policy for the last several months, we are moving in this direction, we believe. And then lastly, looking at Russia's oil revenues, how impactful are these sanctions, Ukraine's attacks within the country and driving up fuel prices, causing delays within Russia, and of course the tariff wars, if that lowers global growth and therefore lowers oil prices even further. And then what to really watch out for is not necessarily just simply the economic and financial impact on the Russian system, which will be significant, but the point here is creating that much pressure, political, economic, financial, military pressure on the Kremlin, on the political system, and then hoping that Putin does something, frankly, dumb enough that authoritarian regimes typically do, which is start meddling in financial policy, in central bank policy, and causing extreme macroeconomic and financial instability within the country. And then that's how we can see problems arising and either the Putin regime collapsing. I'm not saying this happens in the next month or 6 months, but that would be the process as to how this would actually happen, creating the necessary political instability emanating from the financial and economic instability. Lastly, then, I won't go into this too far, but you can see all of our forecasts here. 2025 and 2026, we have revised down alongside most forecasts for Ukraine. Given relatively weak performance in the first half of the year, a lot of that driven by a weak harvest, relatively high inflation in the first half of the year, and then obviously this winter, Q4, being relatively tough with the blackouts, impacting investment, impacting consumer spending, and down the line. Watch out for 2026, particularly if you're working in euros, and if you're exposed to euro depreciation considerably, that will be problematic for next year and across the entire year and moving into 2027. So definitely embrace your hedging strategies and prepare for that. More positively, though, we do expect a ceasefire at some point. I don't think that's going to happen in January, February, but as we approach the summer, June, July, August, that becomes much more of a likelihood. So prepare your business for that potential. And then lastly, what businesses are saying. We recently ran our Q3 Voice of the Market report with business benchmarking survey results. I won't go into everything here, but the very positive news is that people are actually relatively optimistic about the business environment this year, better than next year. There's hiring going on. About half of businesses are actually raising their headcount, and this is in an economy that's only growing by 2%, that's at war, of course, with all the risks involved. And then lastly, about half of our client base expect a ceasefire at some point in 2026, which is a major uptick in optimism compared to where we were, say, even 6 months ago, not to mention a year or 2 years ago. So that is it. I do want to wrap things up. I'll check if there's questions. For those of you in Kyiv, please do save the date for our next event on December 12th. Let me now check to see if there are any questions. I don't see any questions in the chat. So assuming there are no further questions, then Christopher, I will hand it off to you, and you can provide us with a security update from Brightbird. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Yep.
Hope everybody can hear me.
Yes.
Yep, you're good.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you, Mark. I just think you missed one point. I hope there's 1% chance that Ukraine will get the territory back, because I really think they deserve it. That's for sure. I've met a lot of those soldiers fighting out there, and wow, what a job they're doing, right? So let's keep 1% chance of that. That would be nice. Thank you. Can I change this slide?
Yep, I'm doing it here for you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. So what we all know is, and we also saw that last year, right, that the Russian strikes in Ukraine energy and gas infrastructure, it increases throughout October, and we also saw a bit of that in September, and I think that will keep on going for December. And I agree that it will be a cold winter for people in Kyiv, Odessa, yeah, everywhere, Sumy, Kharkiv, and so forth. So yeah, a lot of power outages and stuff like that. So I totally agree with Mark on that one. And also the fighting in Pokrovsk continues. I think Yuri is the expert on that one, but I think right now they've conquered about 60 or 80% of the city, right? And they do a lot of covert stuff, and the Russians they roam around disguised as civilians and do strikes. So yeah, it's a dirty urban combat scenario down there, and you also see a drone warfare like you have never seen it before down there, and that suppresses the tactical what you call it, drawback for the Ukrainians, that make it very, very hard, because if you like pop up your head, right, there's a couple of drones and you'll be slaughtered. So that's they take a lot of casualties, and so do the Russians, of course. So yeah, and I think that right now I think that the Ukrainians just are trying to get out of Pokrovsk in the best way they possibly can do, and pick up the fight at the next line of defense. But I hope Yuri will tell a bit about that. And of course, the Russian forces continue to attempt their advances in Zaporizhzhia and in Donetsk. But we also see that the Ukrainian forces also making a bit of counter offensives, and they are also doing a great job, right? But whenever you're doing a counter offensive, then you're out of your trenches, right? And the drone warfare is playing a big role in that, and then you take a lot of casualties. So I think they're cautious about that, because I think that, and this is just how I see it, right, that Ukrainian lives are more important than a square kilometer of land, right? Of course, you have strategic cities and stuff like that, but they need to preserve the units for the fight later on, right? So they are more willing to give up a bit of land instead of just pouring in soldiers like the Russians are doing. So yeah, and also like you said, Mark, right? That the Russians are still trying to bully the West a bit and see if they can intimidate us a bit and maybe get dividends in the NATO with those flybys and stuff like that, and the electronic warfare and whatever they are trying to do. So they're absolutely trying to destabilize NATO and the EU. So yeah, you take the next slide, please. Thank you. So what we have seen is right that the aerial strikes is increasing target smaller, less defended stop stations rather than the broad nationwide networks, and that's true, but it's also not true because they have also hit quite big thermal power plants, right? But they have spread the attacks all over the country, and that's also because you have seen the production of military equipment that has also been spread all over the country. So before we were like, yeah, if you're going to Lviv and Ivano-Frankivsk and stuff like that, you'll be pretty safe, right? But we've seen a bit of change in that because the production facilities have moved around in the country and they're spread around the country. So right now, of course, it's still more safe to go to Lviv than to go to Kiev, but we also see conferences and stuff like are moving to Lviv, sorry, and that highlights Kiev a bit, and the Russians are seeing that and following those progresses, right? So I think we need to change our mindset from okay, we're going to Lviv, it's a safe place, to okay, we're going to Lviv, it's actually in a war zone, right? But still a safe city, but anything can happen, right? And we also see that because there is a large interest for outside companies to go in and test things and have started working with a lot of these military units like the Sword Brigade and Da Vinci and whatnot. And so they're testing equipments in Shitomir, and I don't want to say all the places, but I think everybody knows them, right? So, and we've seen the Russians hit them really hard. Also going, especially after the shelters. So I think if you're a company, right, you're traveling through Ukraine and you're testing stuff, you really need to get your insurance right and talk to companies like mine or like Guardian or whoever you use, right, to get the procurements done, right. So, let's see, I'm just talking. So, and also, what would it careful? Perfect. And what we also have seen is that if you move to the sea and to the land, is that they have hit hard. They have always hit like the ports of Odessa and the port just south of Odessa and the Mykolaiv port. Not so much though, but still a bit in Mykolaiv, but especially Odessa, right? They have moved the attacks a little bit down to Ismail. That's on the border of Romania, down in is the Donau River is called, down there. Because we also see a bit of interest from foreign companies to go down there, and you also see some using the ports in Mykolaiv and stuff. So of course it attracts a bit of attention from Russia, and we see that it has moved a bit southern from Odessa, right? down to East Mars. So I don't think there's a port right now you can say, okay, this is a safe place to be, right? I think everything is on the radar, on Russia's radar, right? And we actually see the same when it comes to the railway infrastructure, because over the past couple of months we have seen an increase in the attacks on rail infrastructure. It's mainly in the east, though, part of Ukraine, but also in Odessa and a bit in the rest of the country. But we do not observe a direct shift in the Russian methodology from targeting logistic nodes and cargo trains to civilians, but rather a higher degree of tolerance for the collateral damage while conducting strikes. So what does this mean if you travel to Kiev? It doesn't really mean anything other than delays. Of course, if you travel from Poland right to Kiev, but if you go like more east from Kiev to Sumy and stuff like that, you really need to be careful, and we absolutely think that you should be careful about that and avoid doing that, right? But we don't see a shift like this. There are a lot of talks about in September, like right now the Russians are going after civilian trains. We don't see that trend, but you need to look when you board a train, right? Look at the train. Is it only consists of passenger trains or also cargo? Then don't do it, right? Because if you mix
Ти можеш
cargo
без
and passenger,
телефонina.
sorry, is that a question? Or I should just well,
Continue. I'm not sure.
thank you. So don't go on mixed trains, right? If you just stay to the passenger trains, you should be fairly safe when you don't go further east than Kiev or Odessa. I hope that makes sense, right?
Okay.
So I think that's more to cover it, I hope. And I think Yuri, he's gonna go more into details about the frontline stuff. I don't know, but I hope
We
so.
have that was excellent. Thank you for the presentation there, Christopher. We have a couple questions, so
Absolutely.
a couple here for you.
Thank you.
Could you put a few words on whether you see a slowdown in business travel due to increased strikes or whether companies are increasingly visiting?
Well, they're absolutely increasingly visiting. That's also it's also a bad thing, right? Because we see a lot of attention and we see a lot of cooperation with the Ukrainian weapons manufacturing. So that's positive for the Ukrainians, right? But it also makes it a bit more dangerous for the foreigners to go to Ukraine and test stuff in the more known locations, right? So it's been more and more difficult to find locations to test things. So yeah.
Okay.
Hope that answers the question. But absolutely, we see a rise in travelers to Ukraine.
Yeah, that's what I would say we've seen as well over the course of this year. It's
Yeah,
good to hear your confirmation.
and I think one of the latest actually stats from the government that the number of travelers to Ukraine has not dramatically but significantly increased. It's not just tourists, but we see that there are a lot of foreign companies are getting involved, are interested in this market, and especially defense sector is extremely increasing the number of people interested in that industry, in that sector, and they come into Kyiv in a big I would say numbers.
And before we hand it to, thanks, Andrew. Before we hand it to Yuri, there's a question here about, do you see, from Jesper, do you see the Russians going after Western interests or assets? Just very, very briefly, yes, they've already said they would. For 2 years, actually, every time that the West has proposed taking Russians' foreign exchange reserves, the Kremlin, somebody in the Kremlin has said, sure, you can do that, and then we're going to we're going to seize Western assets, corporate assets, and et cetera, within the country here. And that they've reiterated that over the last couple of months as this has gotten more serious from the EU. So that should definitely be expected. However, the numbers are minor, well under, not, it's $300 billion that Russia has in FX reserves, and we're talking about maybe a few billion at most of Western assets within Russia. There's a few other questions, but I think it's important. I think we handled the big ones. And then, Yuri, I'll let you take things off. And of course, if you want to, you're free to answer any of the questions here that are in the chat. So, Yuri, go ahead, Andrew.
Again, Yuri Sak, former advisor to Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, co-founder of Stratcom War Room, and partner at CFC Big Ideas. Yuri, welcome. And we would like to hear, maybe we can start with practical implications of the merger between the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Strategic Industries. It used to be two different ministries, and can you tell us why they probably were merged and what their implications are?
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone. If you will allow me, I will try to give an extended or expanded answer to that question. So, at the beginning of the large-scale invasion in 2022, the Ministry of Defense, as many others, have been caught off guard by the scale of the invasion, by the exponentially growing need for armaments. So it's quite natural that during the first period of this large-scale invasion, the Ministry of Defense was 24/7 concerned with only getting weapons for the Ukrainian armed forces, getting them from anywhere. Now, we did have some stuff in our warehouses, but according to even the most generous estimates, the stuff that we had would have lasted us for maybe 2 or 3 months at best. Now, that meant that everyone in the Ministry of Defense of that period was involved around the clock in reach out to our foreign partners with the view to getting more weapons so that we can hold on. The Rammstein format appeared shortly after that, and from that moment on, the supply of military aid to Ukraine was beginning to be more and more institutionalized and more disciplined. Of course, things would arrive to Ukraine always a little too late, a little in smaller quantities that we required. And I was, for example, part of the member at the MOD that was responsible for the international outreach. And I remember every time we would ask our partners to, bring their game up one level. For example, we would ask for howitzers. They'd say, no, it's, crossing red lines. We cannot do that. So after weeks of talks and negotiations, they would finally barge in and do it. Then we were asking for multi-launch rocket system HIMARSes. They refused and were reluctant to provide them. Then they did. Then we had a tank coalition that was asking our partners to provide Ukraine with tanks on the battlefield. And again, after months of hard talks and negotiations, it happened. And so on and so forth. And long-range missiles like Storm Shadows, ATACMS, or ATACMS, whichever way you prefer to call them. And of course, finally, the F-16s, and now the Tomahawks. So in a way, this still remains one of the core functions of the Ministry of Defense, to get weapons and military support from our partners abroad. Now, at the same time, in parallel, the Ministry of Strategic Industries was tasked with, almost resurrecting the defense industry of Ukraine. Because if you think of it, in February 2022, Ukraine defense sector was a little over 100 companies. And take, for example, Bogdana, which is now one of the best self-propelled howitzers on the front lines. So we had one Bogdana, and the capacity was to produce one more a month. And today that number has gone up to, just think for a moment, to 40 a month. I mean, that's more than than all NATO countries, or European at least NATO countries combined. And without exaggeration, I think what happened with the Ukraine's defense industry in this very short period of time is anything short of a miracle. Because if you look at even 2023, when the Ministry of Strategic Industry has announced that from now on we will invest heavily and will ask government to facilitate and streamline processes so that we can deliver 1 million drones to the front lines. The ministry was actually criticized, if not ridiculed, for that statement because it seemed so far-fetched and almost unrealistic. We are now at a point where the capacity of Ukrainians drone manufacturers exceeds 8 million a year. And that's all thanks to the shifting focus of the leadership of the country. And I mean, I will omit now details about, how much of what we can produce. It will suffice to say that at the moment, 4 years into the large-scale invasion, Ukraine's defense sector is more than 900 companies. About 100 of these companies are state-owned, but there is a lot of state-private partnerships going on. There are more than 25 foreign Western manufacturers who are now at a different stage of localizing their production in Ukraine. And these include big names like BAE Systems, like Rheinmetall, like Saab, like Northrop Grumman. And if some of you, and I'm sure that's true, some of you must have attended, for example, the DFNC3 forum, which just happened in early October, you saw that the interest to Ukraine's defense sector is immense from all over the world, from different countries. Now, Andrew, back to your question as to the rationale behind the merger. If we look back at where we were at the beginning of the summer, and Mark is here, an expert on geopolitical issues which have an impact on the course of affairs in Ukraine. But at the beginning of the summer, we were at very low, as a country, we were at the very low stage of our relationships with our main strategic partner, the United States of America. Now, in reality, that meant that we had to aspire to be even more self-reliant than before, simply because it was I mean, it still is in some ways, but back then it was terrifyingly unpredictable, I mean, the assistance from our foreign partners. For now, at least we can see that the US is willing and ready to at least sell the weapons to the European countries who will then provide them to Ukraine. And in view of the absence of alternatives, we'll take that and say thank you and be very grateful. And you understand that, right? But at the same time, middle of summer, it was really beginning to be clear. Plus, we've already been in a situation where you remember 2024 and the huge delay with the voting for the supplementary aid support bill in the US Congress. I mean, that put us on pause, and the situation was very
Janusz, ty widzisz, da?
Oh, can you mute your microphone, please?
Ah,
no, unless
So that Yuri, this was the $60 billion deal that we've been waiting.
Yes.
And was postponed for I believe
ja
67 months.
online na
Oh, Jesus Christ.
ukraiński seminar.
We're with you, Frederick. If you want to chip in our conversation, we'd be more than happy to hear now or later.
No, he didn't mute his microphone. I don't know.
He probably doesn't even know. Now
Yeah.
he does.
No,
Thank you. Thank you so
Sorry.
much, Frederick.
Sorry.
That's all good. That's all good. So here we are, July 2025, and the situation again is very unstable, unpredictable. In July 2025, according to the official statements of the president of Ukraine, roughly about 40% of weapons used by the Ukrainian army was Ukraine produced. Ukrainian drone producers have already successfully provided in excess of millions of FPV drones. The armed forces and defense forces of Ukraine have received also hundreds, if not thousands, of deep strike drones. And the need for self-reliant is only growing. And this reshuffle, the government reshuffle, essentially meant to create what Dennis Shmyhal, when he was appointed, he used the term a unified framework for defense management. Now, the fact that somebody like Denis Shmyhal, who ex-prime minister and a person with the super efficient talent for building complex processes and procedures, the fact that he was appointed to this position and the fact that two ministries were merged was received by all stakeholders as a clear sign that the defense production will be top priority for the ministry. Of course, other issues are still there, but defense production, so accelerating defense, streamlining the legal framework, ensuring that that the Ukrainian manufacturers can shorten the period between the ideation of their product to launching mass production. So all of these issues were signals of the renewed focus on defense production. And at the moment, if you just have a quick glance at the Ministry of Defense website and look through the news feed, you will see that, out of three news posted by the ministry, two will most probably be dedicated either directly to defense industry or to international partnerships which are forged and maintained to boost Ukraine's defense industry even further. I mean, as we speak, the Minister of Defense is on a foreign trip. Yesterday, he met with the Joint Expeditionary Force, which is UK-led coalition of northwestern countries in Europe, and there have been some important agreements reached with our partners. For example, there will be a new production of interceptor drones, joint production with Norway, and that's just the result of yesterday. Then Latvia also was yesterday part of that trip, and there's more links forged in the defense industries, between the defense industries of our countries there as well. So by and large, what we are seeing, and one more thing, those of you who have been following the evaluation by the experts of the activities of the Ministry of Affairs of Defense, you might have seen that in early 2025 there have been concerns about certain lack of efficiency, put it diplomatically, in the Ministry of Defense. And just the mere fact that those same people who were very critical of, these are all known figures from the public sector, from the civil sector, people who understand very well how the ministry, the potential of the Ministry of Defense. So at the moment, so far so good, but we haven't seen any of those repeated criticism, which probably is indirect proof that the Ministry of Defense under the new leadership is doing well. And for example, last week there was an annual event held by one of the weapons producers associations, the Technological Forces of Ukraine, which is in charge of, one of their key focuses is working on opening up export of Ukrainian weapons to foreign countries. I attended that meeting, and it was very interesting to hear that this year compared to the last year, the representatives of these associations were much more complimentary towards the government in terms of how government is helping the manufacturers to produce more and to be more competitive on the global market. Now, I will conclude this section with a simple figure. At the moment, the capacity of the Ukrainian defense sector stands at $35 billion US. That's the capacity. Now, the government has only 10 billion, which it can use to procure weapons from the Ukrainian weapons producers. And of course, that's a gap which results in 2/3 of the capabilities of our manufacturers of weapons standing idle. Now, this is why the government is working very hard to close that gap. One way to close that gap is, of course, through direct influx of foreign financial support. I'm sure you've heard the name, the Danish model, which is essentially where a government of Denmark, or any other country for that matter, because by now this Danish model is used not only just by Denmark, But so a foreign government uses its money to buy Ukrainian-produced weapons from the Ukrainian manufacturers for the Ukrainian army. This way, they're supporting Ukrainian economy, they're supporting Ukrainian weapons manufacturers, and they're supporting the Ukrainian army. And they're helping our cause, right? Achieving just peace, hopefully sooner than later. So using these creative international crowdfunding almost mechanisms, the government is trying to raise more money for the Ukrainian manufacturers of weapons. And in 2025, I mean, estimates vary, but around 6 billion actually have been raised through a variety of these different mechanisms. And of course, that's been huge help for our manufacturers. Second point I'd like to make, of course, the export. So finally, after long and very difficult discussions, the president of Ukraine, first at the General Assembly, the UN in September, and then later in Ukraine, made a statement that Ukraine is ready to open the so-called controlled export of weapons. Now, this will be a game changer in the defense industry, I'm sure, because for example, the technological force of Ukraine, which I've already referred to, they have conducted a new research into the desires or willingness or aspirations of Ukrainian manufacturers to relocate to, for example, Eastern European countries. And since the announcement of the opening of the export, the number of such companies willing to relocate has dropped. If I'm not mistaken, something from 81% to 51%.
Yeah,
it is still,
yeah. I said that's correct, because some of the companies have been struggling to export the weapons. So the goal of exporting the experts is to sell the weapons to our allies, is to raise the funding for their own production for the armed forces of Ukraine. That's right. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right. So, in a nutshell, the purpose of that merger and the purpose of bringing everything defense-related under one roof was to create, I will repeat, a unified control and management system for defense sector, to boost production, to advance digitalization, to expand foreign partnerships, and to ultimately make sure that the Ukrainian army is provided with everything it needs to repel the enemy, and to ensure that when the time comes, we are in a strong position with the view to negotiation of the peace process. And every time I think we showcase our defense sector by launching deep strikes, for example, into Russia, Donald Trump thinks, hey, Ukrainians do have cards. So I think it's very important for us to understand that the Ukrainian weapons producers essentially are producing cards which are visible on the international scene, and they generate more support for Ukraine. And as a result, we are becoming, or rather we are transforming from being just the consumer of military foreign aid, we are becoming a partner of the global security system, an equal partner, because the technology that we have, the battle-proven and combat-tested innovations that we can share with our partners in the West are invaluable. Yesterday, I was going with my colleagues with a group of American investors, high level, here in Kyiv, and guess what was happening? These guys, because they have this very great business acumen. They actually not from the defense sector. They're just great businessmen, very successful in the US. And they are looking at different things that the Ukrainian manufacturers produce. So drones here, like small FPV drones here, interceptors there, radio electronic warfare equipment, another enterprise. And in their minds, they are already designing a way in which all of these different elements and components can be brought into one integrated system that will benefit the United States of America in ensuring safety in their cities.
Yeah, that's you're 100% correct.
It's very inspiring.
And Yura, a question. So there's a few concerns we've heard from many people who are saying, you know what, Russia is keep on pushing, and people who usually follow the different media outlets, news platforms, and everyone, oh, Russia is keep on pushing, keep on pushing. Yes, we have some disadvantage in the manpower for sure. However, when we speak to the people, and you know some of them as well, who work specifically with the defense industry companies, who invest in those industries, and we see the progress of the new developments in the last, even we speak about the last 12, 15 months, and we see that we're already talking about long-range missiles. We're already speaking about millions of drones. We're talking about the new technologies, and we're talking about electronic warfare. And we had one speak at our event last time. And what actually the people who are deeply involved in defense sector, they're saying, no, 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 we're not at disadvantage in general. And if we look at the defense sector, I think in 1 year, Russia might be at a disadvantage because of so many new innovations are taking place in Ukraine, so many new projects and new defense innovations are being made in Ukraine. So, any comments from your side? You're deeply involved in defense sector. What's your view on these things?
Andrew, I wish I could say now that you are 100% right. I wish I could say now that Russia is still a backward country with no knack for technology or innovation. But I'm afraid I cannot say that because at the moment, the dynamics between the innovation race between us and them is, very, very almost equal. So the innovation cycle has shrunk to anything between 2 weeks to 1 month, very short. So the moment something appears on the front line, the other side comes up with a countermeasure, and it's a touch and go all at a very fast innovation cycle. Plus, we have to remember that Russians are continuously supported and helped by some big countries in the far Asia. And that means that they're receiving, for example, machinery and equipment that allows them to quickly scale up production of certain things, like the infamous Shahed drones and other weapons that they use to terrorize Ukrainian cities.
Right.
I mean, you have all seen that, for example, latest report that the glide bombs that Russians have been able to launch only 75 kilometers in the past, which meant that for a Russian plane to launch a glide bomb, it had to it still could launch it from the Russian airspace, but it had to approach the border so closely that it would be within the range of our air defense systems. So now their glide bombs travel, because they have been improved and advanced, up to 200 kilometers. That puts the Russian planes out of reach for our defense forces, and it puts us at disadvantage. A very similar story we have all observed with the invention of the fiber optic drones, right? So the moment they appeared on the front lines, they've rendered irrelevant electronic warfare equipment, most of it, jamming, spoofing, and all that. So at the moment, it's a matter of race. Who's going to come up with longer range fiber optic drones and means for countering them? And of course, the interceptors. Interceptors are the big thing today, and everybody wants them. Like, we need them. Our European countries, after the incursions into the European airspace of the Russian drones, they need them. So it's very reassuring that every time President Zelensky speaks about defense industry, he makes a point that emphasis is now on developing interceptors. Hopefully, we'll be able to, next year to produce them in hundreds of thousands.
Thank you, Yura. So there's a couple of questions. Let's go through a couple of questions, and we'll make sure we'll cover all of them. So if you remember, there's a question from Greg, and we remember that just in the last couple of weeks, China started putting limits on exporting certain components to Ukraine. So the question from Greg is, are Ukrainian producers having more troubles obtaining Chinese components as recently reported? So, and how serious is this problem?
Well, everybody's, of course, worried and concerned, and this is why one of the priorities of the Ministry of Defense is to work towards ensuring that Ukrainian drone manufacturers are self-reliant. And there are already some products which are produced in Ukraine for the Ukrainian army, which 100%, like components, are almost 100% Ukrainian produced. But having said that, of course, we're still dependent on chips and batteries and other and optics from many of which are from China. And from what I understand, for now there are still like ways to bypass this problem through third countries, which is exactly what Russia actually is doing,
Right.
because every missile that they fire at us, we find components from the US, the UK, and other countries who support us, not them. But yes, I mean, theoretically, this could, I mean, if it's a complete halt, of course, it would make things more difficult.
Yeah. So another question, a little bit from a different area, was a mistake for Zelensky to allow young men up to age 22 to leave the country? And so, what do you think regards to that?
Well, I think it's a difficult question. Simply because on the one hand, it is too early to say what will happen. I mean, even we don't even have the exact figures of those young men who left and those who have returned.
So as of today, I'm sorry for cutting you off. There was just a couple of days ago, there was up to 100,000.
Well, but that figure, see, that 100,000 already has been disproved by the Polish side, because they said that's like an overall figure of all who have gone there and back. But I think that by and large, it's a good thing, and I hope it pans out well. I'll explain why. Because this will allow, I mean, we have to fight this war, and we have to ensure that the economy in Ukraine is resilient. But we also have to think about the future. And these young men, and they are the future of Ukraine. And many of them, I assure you, I have some in my sort of circle. These are kids who go and they study at the universities. I mean, there are many who have been already in European universities or other foreign universities before this decision was taken. The only thing, they couldn't come back to visit their parents or relatives because of that ban. Now they just easily come back and they leave back to their studies, and many of those I know are planning to return after their studies to Ukraine. And mathematically speaking, actually, if you consider that the high cap is 22 years old, so if somebody who's 22 now leaves, they will become of age of obligatory military conscription in 3 years. So let's hope that in 3 years there will be no war. Let's hope that in 3 years we'll be thinking about rebuilding our country and not about conscripting more soldiers.
To be frank with you, there was a few comments that I personally heard from the guys from the front lines, and they said the guys up to 25 years most of times are useless. They have no experience. They said, like, we say 8 out of 10 young guys up to 25 years is not a good thing for our brigade, and that's what's the comment. Mark and Yuri, for you as well. So there is a question from Oleg. In your opinion, what will be the biggest challenges for Ukraine over the next 100 days? So we're talking about 3 months, militarily, economically, and politically.
I'll start just very, very quickly. Militarily is to do this tactical retreat out of Pokrovsk and continue to do what they've done without a rupture of the line, a strategic breakthrough, which seems like that's the base case scenario. economically, keeping things afloat, protecting the energy infrastructure this winter as much as possible to allow businesses to keep investing, planning for a stable, predictable future. And obviously homes, people can live as comfortably as possible. And then politically, the biggest thing is by far, the EU has to take Russia's FX reserves.
Exactly.
So whatever Zelensky can do in Brussels to help drive this, that's absolutely critical.
And Yuri, mutually.
I will just add to what Mark has said. I agree with everything he said, but I will just add that another important thing will be for us to continue to speak with the White House the language they understand, trust, and believe in. Because with them on board, every one of the challenges that Mark has just mentioned will be slightly smaller.
Yeah. And there is another one. Would European Union jurisdictions permit Ukraine to recruit actively volunteers to fight the war against Russia in the countries of EU, UK, and others?
To recruit what volunteers?
Actively recruit volunteers in
EU
nations.
Yeah.
You mean like opening conscription booths
in Brussels and Berlin and well maybe not Berlin, London, but maybe more realistic.
I know I'm not sure even if it was allowed, I'm not sure it would work. It would just scare people more.
Right. Okay, let's wrap it up. Yura, thank you so much as always. Thanks, it's a pleasure to hear your thoughts and thank you for participating. Thank you, everyone. Just a reminder, December 12th, we have a live event, the fourth live event this year in Kyiv and Parkovy, and we'll have an interesting event. We will concentrate on finance. And feel free to reach out to us and attend the event. We'll see you already in about a little bit over a month. Again, thank you for attending the webinar, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Quiet evening, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, bye.